Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on program income and NSP administration strategies post-closeout. This is another webinar in a series of webinars for NSP grantees. And unfortunately, this recording is not the actual webinar recording. Due to technical difficulties, we were unable to record the original webinar. So this recording is without HUD staff, and we will not do a Q&A session, but we will post a Q&A document as part of the resources for this webinar. So on the line we have Monty Frank, who will begin the presentation.
Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be able to do this presentation. Again, we had a very good turnout for the original broadcast of this. I am going to be talking to you today about using program income to administer your NSP program after you've achieved closeout. And we're going to do this in three basic topics. I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about some of the program income resources that are available to you on the website, because this is not a basics of program income webinar, but rather how you use the program income after closeout. Secondly, then I'll go into some of the sources and uses of program income and some of the exceptions or rules that are unique to the use of program income after closeout. And then third, I will go into some strategies, suggestions, and ideas about how you might manage the program after closeout and take advantage of the program income available to you to administer your program. Some of the resources that are available to you on program income, of course, there's the policy alert that came out in July of 2011, and that policy alert actually covers the basics of program income, including how you can use, what your sources of program income are and how you can use them. In addition, those of you who have chosen to use a revolving loan fund format, which is a sort of a unique use of program income, there was a separate policy alert in August of 2012. There is also discussion of program income and also some issues of closeout in the unified or combined program notice that came out in October 2010, covering all three NSP programs. But HUD also published in November 27, 2012, a notice that was amended the unified program notice to talk about closeout issues, land bank issues, and recapture. Those are policy issues that you should be aware of and be looking at, although we are still waiting for the closeout notice and guidance that HUD has been working on, and we do hope to see that soon, although we do not have it today. Of course, a lot of the program income rules come directly from CDBG regulations on which the NSP program is based. Program income is defined at 24 CFR 570-500A, and its use is discussed at 570-504 as listed there. You will see that a lot of what is in the NSP program is based upon those CDBG rules. There have been a number of webinars over the last couple of years on program income. You see the key ones listed there, and I would urge you to go to those. You can access them by going to the onecpd.info website and looking up the NSP webinars. We've given you dates and titles there. You can also search for them by program income, and the same thing with the FAQs on it, searching for NSP program income. If you have questions about DRGR, for example, and what basic program income rules, we have to suggest that you go to those resources, since this webinar presumes that you've got some background in program income, and we'll only talk about program income uses after closeout. Now, just as a very quick review, I want to remind you what closeout is, what post-closeout program income sources might be. For most of you, I really see your post-closeout program income coming from the first three bullets on this slide. The proceeds from sale or lease of property that you've acquired, rehabbed, or redeveloped with NSP or NSP program income. Presumably, you will have, to achieve closeout, you will have sold or leased all of the properties that were funded with your NSP original grant amount, but you may have properties that were being developed with program income that could still be in development as you close out, so there could be some proceeds coming in there. In addition, some of you lent the money as an amortizable loan and have principal and interest coming in on those NSP loans over time. And others sold properties to home buyers using a recapture note and mortgage or deed of trust. And when those home buyers sell, there could be some net proceeds of sale flowing to the program under the affordability agreements that are in effect. Those are the likely greatest sources of program income for you after closeout, although you may have some of these other sources that also come in. Interest on program income held pending reuse. You can keep them in interest-bearing accounts, and the interest earned is itself program income and is used in the same way that program income is used. I do want to make a side comment that program income rules pertaining to interest earned on revolving loan funds are a little bit different under the CDBG program, and you should talk to your HUD representatives about interest earned on any revolving loan funds that you may have created. In addition, you may have demolished some properties, privately owned properties, and placed liens on them under UC. And when those properties are sold, those liens will need to be paid off, and that could also be program income to you. And then finally, I want to remind you that if the grantee or the subrecipient directly own rental properties, then the net operating income of that property is considered program income and subject to the program income rules that we're going to be discussing. Properties, rental properties that are privately owned by developers and owners, not subrecipients, are privately held, and their net operating income is money that they keep. It is not program income to you or your subrecipients unless that money is paid back to you. We are assuming that you have properly underwritten the developers to determine that their proceeds and revenue are reasonable and that they've not been unduly enriched under the rules. But anything that you allow them to keep within that framework is money that belongs to the private developer and is not program income. It's only if you were, as the grantee or as a subrecipient, own a property that it would be considered program income. Now, what can you use program income post-closeout for? Generally, it's the same thing that you can use program income now before closeout. You can use it for NSP admin and for eligible activities that meet one of the NSP eligible uses, that are an eligible activity under NSP, that meet a national objective as required by NSP, and the 25% low-income set-aside applies. There are, however, a couple of key exceptions post-closeout. You'll notice on the slide that one of the exceptions under eligible activities is that you are not limited to target areas. You may spend the funds on eligible properties and eligible uses anywhere within your jurisdiction and are not limited to the target areas that currently define where you can conduct your activities. The other things that I have to mention are exceptions that pertain to particular grantees or when your program income falls below these annual thresholds. What I'm about to discuss in these next few slides applies only to your program income after you close out with HUD. Use of program income before closeout, after you've met your expenditure deadline and before closeout, still follows the same rules as before you met your expenditure deadline. These exceptions apply only to post-closeout program income use. The first exception that we have to talk about has to do with a couple of grantees that are a relatively small percentage of all the NSP grantees, but nonetheless the difference in their use of post-closeout program income is significant. Most of the grantees under the NSP programs were state governments, entitlement communities, and non-entitlements with open state CDBG grants. In other words, all of these entities have ongoing relationships with the CDBG program. For all of those grantees, which are the overwhelming majority of grantees, post-closeout program income remains NSP program income and subject to those uses that I just mentioned on the previous slide. However, there are two key exceptions to this. First of all, under NSP 2, there were some nonprofit grantees, and under NSP 3, there were some non-entitlement communities and counties that did not have open state CDBG grants or may not have open state CDBG grants at time of closeout. For those grantees only, the NSP 2 nonprofits, the NSP 3 non-entitlements without an open state grant at time of closeout, they are subject to a different set of program income rules. Their requirements are that during the first 5 years after closeout, they are required to use the program income for NSP eligible activities meeting a national objective. However, the cross-cutting requirements don't apply, and by cross-cutting requirements, I mean all those other federal requirements such as environmental review and Davis-Bacon. I'm referring to program income received during those first 5 years. It is not about when the funds are expended, when the program income funds are expended, but when they're received. So from the date of closeout for the next 5 years, these two types of grantees are limited to NSP eligible activities meeting a national objective as their only requirements. And for them, after 5 years, any program income that's earned after 5 years since the closeout of that agreement, those funds are treated as miscellaneous revenue. Now, miscellaneous revenue is one of those OMB terms that many of us don't use regularly, but the common understanding is that these funds are unrestricted. They are not subject to program requirements. So only for the NSP 2 nonprofit grantees and the NSP 3 non-entitlements that don't have an open state CDBG grant at time of closeout, these are the requirements that apply. But after 5 years, the program income that's received is not subject to program requirements. Now, the other exception to use of program income funds post-closeout has to do with the amount of program income that you receive. First of all, HUD took advantage of the fact that under the CDBG program, when you receive less than $25,000 of program income during a program year, it is not considered PI, and you may use it for NSP or CDBG administration. I should mention that when I said program year, that HUD has determined that you will follow your consolidated plan program year, the grantee's consolidated plan program year, and calculate the program income that you receive during that program year. You'll report it at the end of that year, and if it's under $25,000, you do not generate a requirement to do activities, but can use all of those funds for administration of either your CDBG or your NSP program. Once you have exceeded the $25,000 threshold, you are subject to the program income requirements, and that means you must use your funds for all of your program income funds for eligible activities in administration. However, the 25% low-income set-aside requirement is not triggered until you receive over $250,000 of program income in a program year. In other words, if you exceed the $250,000 in program income in that year, 25% of those program income funds get added to your low-income set-aside requirement, and depending upon where you are in low-income set-aside activities for your overall program, you may need to do an additional low-income project or unit or activity to stay in line with the 25% minimum requirement. So you will need to keep tracking your 25% low-income set-aside requirement through these subsequent years after closeout. I once again want to emphasize that this is the program income that you actually receive during a program year, and the program year that will be applied will be the program year you have designated in your consolidated plan. Now let's talk a little bit about what your responsibilities are for administration of the program after closeout before we go into how you might use the program income to help you do that. The first, I'm going to mention this in 4 basic categories. The first category is your ongoing portfolio duties. During the life of your program, you've created probably a portfolio of rental and home buyer properties. The rental properties that you've created or funded with your NSP funds will need to be monitored for the affordability period, following the monitoring plan that you set out, and that monitoring will occur for years to come, and that's one of the major duties that you will have on an ongoing basis. With homebuyer properties, you do not have an ongoing monitoring responsibility in the same way you do with rental projects, but you either have imposed a resale restriction or a recapture restriction that would pertain to any sale of those units. So when a homebuyer sells a unit, if the sale occurs with a resale restriction, you would have to approve the new buyer and approve the sale price to the new buyer to ensure that another low-income household or moderate-income household, depending on the limit, moved into the unit. And if you used a recapture approach, you would have a note and mortgage or deed of trust that would be coming due, and some of the proceeds of sale would have to flow back to you as program income. So your responsibilities on the home buyer side run more to implementing or administering the resales and what you have to do to handle any sale by your original home buyers. Some of you also created a land bank of properties that were not developed in the near term. You may recall that you will have 10 years to reuse those properties for an eligible use, and that 10-year period begins from the date of your closeout agreement with HUD. So during this time, you would have to come up with reuse strategies and funding and figure out ways to make the property meet one of the eligible uses. I'll also remind those of you that, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, that the November 27, 2012 notice expanded the things that you could do with land bank properties beyond the eligible uses that are in the NSP program. A second category of administrative responsibility is managing the program income itself. You will have to make decisions about your program income. You'll have to record its receipt, deposit it in the appropriate account, reuse it for eligible activities and administration as permitted by the program. In the near term, that receipting will occur in DRGR. HUD has indicated that it expects at some time in the future that this function might migrate to the IDIS system, but for the near term, you will be reporting it in DRGR. And by the way, I should mention, while you are reporting program income quarterly into DRGR before closeout, your reporting responsibility will go to an annual cycle after closeout. A third category of activity is using the program income that you collect and receive after closeout. There will be a number of things that I want to discuss in the last topic of the day about strategies that you might use in selecting those activities. But for now, let me just mention the administrative obligations. You'll have to think about whether you want to change your program design or the type of activities you do. For example, if you no longer have the required target areas, do you want to broaden where you work? Do you want to change the project types, the amount of funding that you're providing, the other things that you might do with the funds? We'll call those sort of program design changes that you should be thinking about. In addition, you'll want to identify potential projects that can use the program income, and you will indicate their use in the annual action plan that you file with HUD. And of course, you'll have to implement projects and oversee compliance for whatever time period the affordability period applies. And then the fourth category is, of course, you'll have to report to HUD. As I've already mentioned, you will go to an annual DRGR reporting responsibility with your program income, and you will also annually report to HUD on the portfolio that's under active affordability periods, and those of you who have land banks will be reporting to HUD on the status of that portfolio and your redevelopment plans for those land bank properties. Now, who can administer post-closeout? And who can expend the program income? The grantee is responsible for the program and responsible for the program income after closeout. The grantee can directly collect and redistribute all the program income for eligible activities, but if the grantee has been using subrecipients, it has the option of continuing to use subrecipients to administer new activities with program income. I will mention to you that this is a choice that you have as grantee, and that if you are going to use subrecipients, then you'll need to make certain you have an active written agreement with them covering the functions that they are going to be administering. If they're going to continue to collect program income and expend it for new activities, if they're going to monitor the properties and report to you, you shouldn't close out the agreement without having some replacement agreement or extension of the agreement that covers those uses and obligations. Even if you choose to let your subrecipients keep and reuse the program income funds, there's a couple of things that I need to remind you of, and I'll mention the bottom one first. Grantees remain responsible for reporting and compliance to HUD. HUD's relationship is with you, the grantee, and so even if you let your partners keep and reuse the money, you're the one that will need to collect and report the information to DRGR and provide whatever information HUD needs for its monitoring. Secondly, I want to stress that you can allow subrecipients to keep and expend the money, but those annual program income received thresholds of $25,000 and $250,000, they apply to your program as a whole. In other words, if you had 10 subrecipients and they each had under $25,000 of program income, your total would still exceed the $25,000 limit, and so the use of those funds would be subject to the program income reuse rules. Similarly, if you had funding split up, program income split up among multiple subrecipients, so they were all below $250,000, but collectively you exceed the $250,000 threshold, you have triggered the 25% low-income set-aside requirement for that year for the program, even though individually they may not have achieved it. So leaving the program income with your subrecipients does not get you around the program income rules that we're describing here. The program income for a grantee's program is aggregated annually for its program year to determine what requirements apply. I should also probably take a moment to remind you of the cap on administrative costs before we go into administrative strategies. The administrative cap on the NSP program is 10%. It is 10% of your original grant amount plus 10% of program income received. So your administrative funding can grow with program income. There have been a number of questions about how this cap applies, both at the expenditure deadline and at the closeout date, whether unused admin funds are lost or somehow not able to be carried forward. Unused cap remains available to you after closeout and after the expenditure deadline if you've met the expenditure requirement. Remember that at the expenditure deadline, which has passed for all but the NSP3 program, you have to have expended an amount equivalent to 100% of your original grant amount, but those expenditures can come from either your line of credit or program income received. So many of you have expended more than 100% without fully drawing down your line of credit, and effectively have been able to bank some administrative funding to cover your administrative duties after closeout. That will continue to be permissible as long as you've met that 100% expenditure deadline. Your line of credit will remain open, and you can continue to draw those funds. As you continue to receive program income after the expenditure deadline and after closeout, your administrative cap continues to grow. So your cap is cumulatively 10% of the grant amount plus 10% of all program income received over time. I'd also like to note that activity delivery costs will remain eligible after closeout, so you can charge staff time and other costs directly to projects if they are involved in the administration of that particular activity. Since a lot of your post-closeout program income funds will be spent on new activities, one of your strategies that we will talk about is making sure that you're recording what you can as activity delivery costs, given that your admin cap funding might be dwindling at this point. One other thing that I need to mention in response to some questions that were received, if as a grantee I fall under the $25,000 threshold in a particular post-closeout year and I get to spend that money on admin, does that count towards the admin cap? And the answer is no. The admin cap's not increased because those under $25,000 funds are not actually counted as program income. So you can use it for admin, but it's not, that amount's not going to increase the cap that you have available to you. Now we come to probably the key couple of slides to this presentation and the reason that HUD asked me to do this today. What are some of the strategies that you can begin to think about for how you will administer your program after closeout, and how you might use program income to help you do that? We'd be much better off having this discussion when the closeout notice is out and available to you, but we're hoping that some of these things can begin to help your thinking about how to plan for that day when you do achieve closeout. We're going to talk about 5 things on these couple of slides. First of all, we believe it is absolutely essential that you project the future flow of program income and budget for ongoing admin and new projects accordingly. In other words, you should be projecting your flow of funds coming in because you'll need to figure out how many additional activities you must generate and how much additional admin cap will flow in as a result of that program income. And if you're going to be near that $25,000 or $250,000 threshold, you'll want to know that in planning the kinds of activities that you do. If you know you're going to be above $250,000, you should anticipate having to do some low-income set-aside activities, for example. So it's important to project what you expect to come in year to year and not simply wait until the end of the year to see what actually did flow in and then decide what and how you're going to do it. We think it will help with your planning to begin to project that. Second, as program resources dwindle, you may not be able to keep all the staff that you've had on to administer the program, and you may need to look to integrate the ongoing administrative responsibilities with other programs that you have. As you know, there are many similarities in program requirements between NSP and CDBG. NSP, in fact, was built on a CDBG platform. So CDBG staff might be able to absorb some of the NSP responsibilities, and of course CDBG Admin Fund can help administer this program. In addition, the NSP affordability requirements for many grantees are similar to home. So home staff might be able to provide structure and support to ongoing rental monitoring and to resale recapture administrative responsibilities. And of course, cross-cutting issues such as environmental review and Davis-Bacon apply across the board to all of those programs, so those staff should be familiar with those requirements. We're suggesting here that you might have to have staff perform administrative responsibilities for multiple programs, but we aren't necessarily recommending that you combine the program funds. The thing you want to keep in mind is that the NSP rules are a little bit different, and they give you some flexibilities. One of the most important to many of you is the ability to serve up to 120% of area median income when the CDBG and home programs only allow you to go up to 80% or even lower for some rental activities. If you were to combine the funds in such a way that you would lose the ability to serve above 80%, that might reduce your flexibility. So we want to say that while you might be administering with the same staff, you want to be careful about how you combine it. Of course, home and NSP both have given you the ability to have some of your activities occur on a unit basis rather than a project basis. In other words, you can designate units that are the assisted units, and that may still allow you to combine funds in a particular project without taking on additional limitations for those NSP units. But that's something you need to be aware of as you start to think about the combination. Third, we want you to consider the ongoing administrative roles for subrecipients. We have identified that you can choose to allow subrecipients to receive the program income and to reuse the program income. You could also have the subrecipients continue to monitor some of the activities that they oversaw and implemented during the program years. But you need to figure out what role you want them to play, both with regard to ongoing activities as well as program income administration, and make sure that you have agreements with them that reflect these administrative responsibilities. In addition, if you're continuing the relationship with them, are you going to be sharing some of your admin cap with them? Or are they going to charge activity delivery costs for overseeing the activities? Before you close out with them, be clear about their ongoing role and funding, if any. And if you do maintain an ongoing relationship, you don't want to completely close out the agreement with them. Fourth, and this is probably one of the key things we think you ought to think about, is what kind of projects should you fund post-closeout? Projects impose different administrative burdens on you. It depends on project type and the partners that you work with. For example, rental projects have an ongoing monitoring obligation, while the home buyer sales have a simpler administrative function that pertains to resales. There are some partners that are easier to work with than others and require less supervision. What kind of administrative burden are you taking on when you're selecting the property? In addition, when you think about how much program income you have coming in, will you have enough program income flow in to do projects that you may be used to doing? Rental projects, for example, might require a big amount of program income, and how long will it take you to accumulate that program income to be able to do that project? There is not a restriction or a time constraint on you for the use of program income. That's not the issue, but you may determine that you don't have enough program income coming in to fund a particular kind of larger project in a short enough period of time, and you might want to choose projects that can occur more quickly. You also might want to think about those projects that will continue to generate program income for you in the future, since your original grant funds will have been expended at this point and the line of credit will no longer be available to you after closeout. You need to consider ways that your funding activities continue to generate more funding for you to do more projects in the future. I'd like to remind you and say once more that you can accumulate program income even over multiple years until you have funds sufficient to support a project. So you could, for example, decide that you wanted to save money over 2 or 3 years, the program income, and accumulate it until you get enough money to support a particular large project that you want to do. This is permissible because you have expended your line of credit so that program income funds can accumulate. HUD will want to know what you're holding the money for. If there's been no activity within a year, you can expect HUD to ask you for a plan of how you expect to use it. So you should have identified the project or activity that you choose to do and the reason that you are accumulating the funds. But nonetheless, it is permissible as long as you have a valid plan to support your decision not to go ahead and expend it in the near term. Finally, I'll come back to the topic that I mentioned briefly earlier in the presentation, and that is you've relied heavily on the admin budget of 10% of the project, and that admin budget will continue to grow based upon the amount of program income that you have coming in. But as program income dwindles, the amount of admin funds come in and staff start to have limited coverage from the standpoint of admin. We've already talked about maybe shifting some administrative responsibilities to other ongoing program staff, but the other thing we should mention is that as you look for projects to expend the new program income that comes in, you should think about charging the staff time on those new projects to activity delivery and not have to use up what limited admin cap that you have available. These ideas, these 5 thoughts or ideas are just, as I mentioned, not requirements but things that we're suggesting you begin to think about. They're not going to solve your challenge of ongoing program administrative responsibilities after the grant funding has been used up. But we hope it starts some of your thinking about how you'll meet your continuing obligations, and it'll help you get ahead of the things you need to consider as the closeout notice comes out, hopefully in the next couple of months. There's one other thing I wanted to mention for those of you who have land banks. I think that land banks present a unique challenge in post-closeout administration. As I mentioned earlier, the 10-year deadline to reuse land bank properties begins with your closeout. So the clock will have started at closeout, and you have 10 years to reuse them. I'll also remind you that the November 27, 2012 closeout notice provided you with some options beyond the eligible uses that exist in the NSP program. They included things such as using them for CDBG eligible public improvements, transferring them to community land trusts for affordable housing, putting them into active development for affordable housing, or making them part of an locally approved redevelopment plan. HUD was trying to give you some options, recognizing that some of the markets out there have not fully recovered and may not recover in the next few years, to enable you to develop and dispose of all of those properties. So they were trying to give you some additional uses that would be eligible under the program. Those of you who have land bank properties, please go back and look at that November 27th notice so that you're aware of all of those options. As you plan for the use of your post-closeout program income stream, keep in mind that the ongoing obligations of the land bank portfolio include you having to prepare use plans for all the properties. And if you're doing a plan for a particular property, that may be an eligible activity delivery cost, that you're going to have to do ongoing maintenance and insurance of the properties to keep them protected and to not make them a negative element in the communities that you're trying to revitalize. And then ultimately, you're going to have to figure out how to develop and dispose of these properties. And we fully expect that many of these properties are going to need substantial subsidy when it comes time to redevelop them, unless your market has changed dramatically. We raise these challenges on two levels. First of all, some of the program income stream that will come into your program will probably have to be directed to your land bank portfolio to make sure that it meets these ongoing obligations and that it comes up with redevelopment uses. You remember that you accepted the obligation to reuse these properties when you agreed to land bank the properties. But second, I want to point out that as land bank properties are redeveloped and sold, the program income generated by these successful reuse activities should probably be reserved for remaining properties in the portfolio. In other words, grantees should be careful about taking away program income that flows to the land bank portfolio as they achieve success with some of the development. They're going to need all the help they can get. The point we're trying to make here is that those of you who have land bank portfolios have some unique challenges to consider as you plan for the use of program income, both for administration and for additional PI-funded activities. Those are the topics that we wanted to cover in the webinar today. We wanted to draw your attention again to some of the resources that are available to you on the onecpd.info website, as well as some items remain on the HUD-NSP-help.info site that most of you got used to using over the last several years. Much of the library and the events calendar items have moved over to the onecpd.info site, but sometimes you can find some of the old archive information better with the HUD-NSP-help.info site. So we've included that list again for you to do your research and look up those things, including those items that I mentioned at the beginning that are resources on program income for those of you who are new to the topic. We also, again, encourage you to join the OneCPD mailing list and make sure that you are signed up so that you hear of additional things that are posted to that site, as well as webinars and other training events that will become available to you.
Great. Thank you, Monty, for giving this presentation again. And again, for people listening to this recording, there is going to be an FAQ document posted in the resources along with this recording to accompany questions that were asked in the initial broadcast. And if you do have additional questions beyond that, please do direct your questions to the OneCPD Ask a Question inbox, and an expert will give an answer for you. So that concludes today's presentation, and thanks again, Monty.
Okay, you're welcome. Good luck, everybody.